Laurence Fishburne, one of the greatest black actors in American history. For more than half a century, he has stood tall like a monument of storytelling, a symbol of wisdom, a living legend, the man who became the immortal Morpheus in The Matrix. A performance that not only entertained the world, but forever reshaped how humanity imagines a hero. Just the mention of his name summons power, depth, and a legacy carved into the stone of Hollywood's history. And yet, behind that towering greatness lies anguish, almost beyond human endurance. Pain sharp enough to crush the faint-hearted. 2 shattered marriages. A father-daughter bond broken with the child he loved the most. And the heart-ripping shock of discovering that the man he called father for 63 years was never his biological father. Today, we step straight into the eye of that storm, into the heart of these soul-tearing wounds, to witness with our own eyes what Laurence Fishburne is truly facing. And before we begin, if you still remember Morpheus, don't forget to hit that like button as a tribute to this extraordinary talent. It's painful how early life can shape a person long before the world even learns their name. Some breaks strike without warning, yet leave an ache that never stops echoing. Laurence John Fishburne III entered the world on July 30th, 1961, in Augusta, Georgia. Born into a home that looked steady from the outside, but shook under pressures no one dared to speak of. His mother, Hattie Bell, carried both warmth and unyielding discipline, the steel and sacrifice of a woman trying to protect what little she had. His father, Laurence John Fishburne Jr., spent long days inside correctional facilities, but even honest labor couldn't hold together a marriage already splitting at its seams. When he was 5, the family collapsed, not in arguments or chaos, but in a silence heavy enough to change the direction of a life. The man he believed would be his guide faded slowly at first, then entirely, until one day there were no visits promised, no footsteps coming up the walkway, no shadow returning through the door. Years later, Fishburne would say softly, "I kept waiting for him. I didn't know how to stop." And just like that, Hattie was left alone. Not metaphorically, literally. One woman, one child, no partner, no support, no one to share the weight of survival. She did not remarry. She did not look for rescue. She faced the world as a single mother, carrying every fear, every bill, every impossible choice on her own. The world did not soften for her. It pressed harder, demanding more than any one person should ever have to give. And on her tired back, on her long walks home, on her sleepless nights, on her shaking hands, rested the entire future of a son who had just learned, far too early, what it meant to be left behind. Hattie, gathering every bit of courage she possessed, scraped together what little money she had and moved herself and her only child to Brooklyn, New York, a place that, in the early 1970s, could feel as cold as iron stair rails in winter and as unforgiving as the city's endless noise. Their apartment was small enough for sound to bounce between the walls, and the dim stairwells seemed to swallow daylight before it reached their door. Nights carried the smell of chalk dust and fatigue as Hattie graded papers until her eyes blurred, her hands trembling not from weakness, but from the burden of survival. "My mother was the strongest woman I've ever known," he would later say, remembering the soft glow of the kitchen lamp stretching her shadow across peeling paint. There were no toys waiting on the floor, no summer getaways, no gentle safety nets, only the scrape of pencils, the rustle of worn textbooks, and the steady rhythm of a woman who simply refused to give up. Brooklyn didn't merely challenge him, it demanded he endure. Loneliness filled the space where a father's presence should have been. With no siblings and no one to share the burden, the nights felt longer, colder. He found refuge in school hallways, where his footsteps echoed too loudly, and in a library where the air smelled of old paper and forgotten dreams. It was the only place where the world didn't feel like it was closing in. He wiped chalkboards, stacked books, cleaned rooms still warm from the day's lessons, work far heavier than any child should shoulder. "I had to grow up faster than my age," he later recalled, a truth etched into every memory of those years. Brooklyn didn't just shape him, it sharpened him, teaching him to watch, to listen, to survive. In a city overflowing with noise, he learned the strange power of silence. And somewhere within that silence, a spark appeared. Acting didn't arrive as ambition. It arrived as oxygen. On small stages and in youth programs, he discovered a truth both haunting and liberating. When he stepped into a character, people finally saw him. They heard him. "If you act well, people will love you," he confessed years later, exposing the wound beneath the talent. The stage became the first place where absence did not follow him, the first place where the ache of being unseen loosened its grip. Those early shadows, harsh as they were, forged something indestructible inside him. A resilience born from heartbreak, a strength born from solitude, and a flame that would one day lift him from Brooklyn's cracked sidewalks to the fierce, blinding lights of Hollywood. Those early wounds didn't fade. They carried him into a new chapter, one that demanded far more than childhood ever should. By the early 1970s, while most children were still protected by the softness of youth, 11-year-old Laurence Fishburne was already stepping into the world of adults with a weight he never asked to carry. Years later, he would admit, "I was just trying to find a place where I didn't feel so alone." So he walked onto his first small New York stage, not chasing fame, but searching for a place where the ache of being unseen could finally quiet for a moment. Acting wasn't hope, it was escape. And because his mother worked every hour she could to keep their lives afloat, he went to auditions alone, tiny footsteps swallowed by subway tunnels, his hands trembling in casting rooms filled with grown-ups who barely noticed he was there. Life had already taught him a brutal truth. No one was coming to save him. If he wanted air, he had to carve out a space to breathe. His first real film role at 13, in Cornbread, Earl and Me, felt like light cracking through the darkness. But poverty has a way of dimming even the brightest victories. "I learned to deal with disappointment early," he recalled. Rejection lingered at every door. Casting directors offered polite smiles, then looked right through him. Hollywood in the mid-1970s had not yet learned how to make room for a black boy from Brooklyn with no connections and no safety net. Every audition meant hunger. Every winter subway ride meant choosing between saving his coins or buying a warm drink to steady his shivering hands. The city was merciless, and he felt its cold, not just in the wind slicing through his thin coat, but in the way opportunity always seemed just a step beyond reach. Then came the turning point, the role that would change his life and cost him more than anyone understood. At 14, desperate for a chance, he misstated his age to join Apocalypse Now, stepping into what would become one of cinema's most chaotic productions. What he didn't know was that the film, planned for a few months, would spiral into nearly 2 years of relentless shooting in the jungles of the Philippines. It was a world away from Brooklyn, humid, overwhelming, unpredictable. Days blurred into nights under the roar of staged warfare, long hours, and scenes far heavier than most adults ever faced. Reflecting on it decades later, he said softly, "I saw things a kid shouldn't see on a movie set. It forced me to grow up fast. Tempers flared, pressures mounted, fatigue pressed into his bones. It wasn't the physical danger that scarred him, it was the emotional weight of being forced to carry more than a young soul should. By the time filming finally ended, almost 2 years after he began, and with Fishburne now 16, nearing 17, he wasn't the boy who had arrived. "Those years aged me," he once admitted. He walked out of that jungle with a silence in his eyes. One born from seeing too much, too soon. Returning to New York, he found no celebration waiting, no applause, no comfort. Only a small room he could barely afford, where winter seeped through the walls and dinners were often nothing more than instant noodles stretched across days. There was no family nearby, no mentor to guide him, no shoulder to lean on, just a young man confronting a world that demanded more than he had to give. He went to school at dawn, rehearsed in the afternoon, worked in the evenings, and stood in audition lines whenever he could steal the time. Fatigue became constant. Rejection became routine. But breaking was never an option. "I had to grow up faster than my age," he would later reflect, a truth etched into every step he took. Something forged in loneliness, sharpened in those Philippine jungles, kept him moving, kept him standing. He had surrendered pieces of his youth to survive, but from those broken pieces rose a strength that would one day make him one of the most commanding, unforgettable voices in American cinema. Sometimes greatness arrives quietly, then ignites with such force that the world has no choice but to turn and look. After years of hunger, rejection, and a solitary climb through the unforgiving corners of the industry, Laurence Fishburne stepped into the 1990s, carrying every scar he had earned, but also the fire those scars had forged. And in 1991, that fire erupted. As Furious Styles in Boyz and the Hood, he didn't just play a father, he became the moral compass of a generation. Audiences rose to their feet. Critics hailed the performance as a masterclass in strength. Yet beneath that commanding presence lived a painful truth he later whispered, "I never had a father like Furious. I had to imagine him." The man who offered the nation a blueprint of fatherhood was drawing it from the void left in his own heart. Success lifted him, but it forced him to confront the emptiness he had carried since childhood. An ache success alone could never quiet. Only 2 years later, in 1993, he plunged into even darker territory with his Oscar-nominated portrayal of Ike Turner in What's Love Got to Do with It. The emotional toll was staggering. "That role broke something inside me," he admitted, revealing how deeply he had to reach into his own shadows to bring such complexity to life. Each scene demanded a part of him he could never reclaim. Fame rose around him, yes, but it was fame built on sacrifice, exhaustion, and an emotional brutality the public never witnessed. Yet he carried on, carving his place in Hollywood through sheer resilience, while quietly paying the price for every role that demanded too much. Then came 1999, a year that fused his name with the mythology of modern cinema. As Morpheus in The Matrix, he transcended performance and became an archetype of wisdom, power, and awakening. The film soared past $463 million, and his silhouette, the sweeping coat, the mirrored lenses, the voice like sculpted stone, became immortal. But behind the icon stood a man wrestling with a quieter truth. "Morpheus is who I wish I could be," he confessed, revealing how the world worshipped a version of him steadier and stronger than the one who lived outside the screen. Hollywood celebrated him, but it also confined him, praising his authority while denying him vulnerability. Even with massive earnings, nearly $40 million from the Matrix sequels, $350,000 per episode of CSI, $200,000 per episode of Black-ish, the grind chewed through his spirit. 16-hour days, emotionally heavy characters, and the isolating reality of being a pioneer wore him thin. "Success doesn't quiet the noise," he once said. "Sometimes it makes it louder." But while the world cheered his triumphs, a shadow formed behind him, small at first, then widening into a fracture no one saw coming. In 2021, when The Matrix Resurrections was announced, the internet erupted with anticipation. Fans waited for the return of the man who had given the film its soul. One question echoed everywhere: where is Laurence Fishburne? The answer was devastating. There was no call, no invitation, not even a conversation. The universe he helped build was resurrected without him, as though Morpheus had never existed at all. When asked, he offered a quiet, heartbreaking truth. "I offered, but they didn't respond." It felt like watching a legacy slip into shadow in real time. To outsiders, it was a casting choice, but to him it was a wound deeper than any role he'd ever taken. A professional betrayal delivered not in anger, but in silence. Yet even in that erasure, he did not break. He carried the pain the way he had carried every burden since childhood, with dignity, steadiness, and the quiet resilience of a man who has survived storms his whole life. And from that silence, from being written out of the very myth he helped forge, rose not defeat, but defiance. Because true greatness is never defined by the roles we're given. It is defined by the strength we show when those roles are taken away. And Laurence Fishburne, even in the darkest corner of his career, remained unmistakably powerful, unforgettable, and unbroken. Some truths do not arrive softly. They hit like a silent earthquake, snapping the ground beneath a man who spent a lifetime trusting it was firm. For 63 years, Laurence Fishburne carried an origin story carved into him like stone. He bore the name of the man he believed was his father. He built his strength from the emptiness that man left behind. Nothing in that foundation had ever trembled. Until 2025, until the unblinking studio lights of Finding Your Roots pinned him in place. Henry Louis Gates Jr. opened the heavy ancestral binder, each page turning with the slow inevitability of a verdict. Then a face appeared. Not the man who named him, not the man whose absence shaped his childhood. A different face, a stranger wearing his eyes, his jaw, his silence. And Gates delivered the line that split 6 decades down the middle. "This is your biological father." Time didn't pause. It buckled under him. The shock didn't burst outward. It knifed inward, sharp and unmistakable. Laurence John Fishburne Jr., the figure who drifted in and out of his early years until fading into nothing, was suddenly revealed as a bystander to his own life. And then, the deeper cut. William S. Bohannon, the blood he never knew he carried, had died years before this truth was allowed to surface. No meeting, no late redemption, no chance to search another man's face for pieces of himself. Only a still photograph staring back, with a resemblance so exact it felt merciless. The air thinned. His breath stalled. He lifted his chin with the steadiness of someone refusing to collapse, and released 2 words shaped by 63 years of unspoken ache. "Hello, Father." Not anger, not accusation. Just a greeting hurled across a distance that would never close. Then the second blow landed, quiet, precise, devastating. Bohannon had not left only one child behind. He had a daughter. A sister Fishburne never knew existed. A life running beside his own like a shadow he was never permitted to see. Not conflict, just silence. silence arranged by grown-ups long gone, by a time when truths were locked away to survive another day. The realization struck harder than pain. It revealed an entire branch of family hidden in plain sight, a story denied to him not by cruelty, but by history. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the photograph, as if trying to read the years he would never reclaim. This was no scandal. This was a map, one he had lived outside of for his entire life. And yet, through the shock, something inside him held firm. No bitterness, no blame, only clarity. The secrets of that era were not designed to wound. They were designed to protect. His mother, Hattie Bell, had carried the weight of survival alone. Her silence was armor, not betrayal. Compassion settled where confusion might have grown. And when the cameras finally dimmed and the room exhaled, a single truth rose above the wreckage. Identity does not shatter when challenged. It expands. Laurence Fishburne walked out of that studio not broken, but reborn. A man who had lived 63 years inside one version of his story, now strong enough to hold the truth of another, with grace, with gravity, and with a dignity that could not be shaken. Yet neither the program nor Fishburne framed the revelation as scandal. There was no condemnation, no bitterness, only a deep understanding that the past, especially for Black families in earlier generations, was sometimes shaped by forces, pressures, and fears unspoken. His mother, Hattie Bell, had raised him alone, navigating a world that offered little safety and even less compassion. She worked herself past exhaustion to protect him, to shield him, to keep him afloat. Whatever reasons she held for the silence were her own, shaped by an era far less forgiving than the present. Fishburne honored her memory with gentleness. "My mother did what she thought was right," he said, allowing grace to take the place where resentment might have lived in another man. In that acceptance, he revealed the depth of his character, choosing compassion over blame, understanding over anger. But revelation, even when met with grace, still leaves a mark. Friends later shared that after filming ended, he drove to the Malibu shoreline and sat there for hours, shoes sinking into cool sand, the ocean stretching endlessly before him. Waves rose and fell like memories returning and retreating, each one carrying a piece of the truth he had just learned. He thought about the man he never met, the years that could never be reclaimed, the half-sister he now knew existed somewhere in the world. He thought about the weight of identity, how fragile it is, how powerful. And yet, when he finally rose from the shoreline, there was steadiness in his steps, not sorrow. Because identity is not destroyed by truth, it is refined by it. And Laurence Fishburne, shaped by silence, strengthened by hardship, and anchored by a lifetime of resilience, walked forward with the quiet dignity of a man who understands that sometimes the truth arrives late, but still arrives in time to set the heart free. It is heartbreaking that the tragedies of family did not end with his birth. They followed him into adulthood and rose again the moment he tried to build a home of his own. In 1985, when Laurence Fishburne met actress Hajna O. Moss, it felt, for the first time in his life, as if the universe was offering him a chance to rewrite every wound he had carried since childhood. She understood the quiet in him, the shadows he rarely named, the fragile hope he protected like glass. Their wedding was small, tender, and full of the kind of belief only two young dreamers could hold. That love, finally, might be enough. In 1987, when Langston was born, Fishburne held his son as though he were holding the future itself. "You will never feel what I felt," he whispered, a promise trembling from a place deeper than memory. Those first years as a father were soft and luminous, late-night bottles, toys on the carpet, scripts scattered across the kitchen table. For a man raised without stability, this was the home he had always prayed for. But even the brightest hope can splinter under relentless strain. Hollywood consumed him. 16-hour days, flights that stole weeks from home, roles that drained every emotional reserve he had. Hajna fought her own battles, auditions, childcare, long nights where she carried the weight of two parents alone. Their love didn't collapse. It eroded, inch by inch. Silence replacing conversation, fatigue replacing tenderness. "We were in the same house, but we weren't together anymore," he would later admit, his voice thick with the kind of regret that grows only from years of trying to hold something already slipping away. Therapy came, time apart came, apologies came. But nothing closed the widening gap. Every effort felt like gripping sand. The harder they held, the faster it slipped through their fingers. By 1990, the truth neither wanted to speak finally stood between them. The marriage was no longer a home, just a shell echoing with what it used to hold. And so it ended, not with shouting or slammed doors, but with a devastating quiet. The kind that doesn't shatter a house so much as empty it. They packed boxes slowly, dividing small things with tenderness. A framed photo for him, a favorite mug for her. Children's drawings placed carefully into separate folders so each would carry a piece of their young world. But the real ending came the day he walked out for the last time. He paused in the doorway, staring at the room that had once held their laughter, their sleepless nights with newborns, their whispered promises about the future. Toys were still on the floor. A family photo hung slightly crooked on the wall. Everything familiar, and suddenly unreachable. As he stepped forward, something inside him tore open, not loudly, not violently, but with the soft, shattering pain of a man meeting the same ghost he had spent his whole life trying to outrun, the ghost of abandonment. Only this time, he wasn't the child being left behind. He was the father forcing himself to walk away from the home he had dreamed would heal everything he once lost. But fate was not finished with him. Months after the divorce, when the heartbreak was still fresh and the house still echoed with absence, life placed one final fragile echo of the world they had once tried to build. In 1991, Montana was born, a tiny, warm miracle arriving into a family already split in two. Fishburne held her with a gentleness shaped by contradiction. The overwhelming joy of meeting his daughter for the first time, and the quiet, stinging truth that she would never come home to the intact family he once dreamed she'd have. Her first breath felt like both a blessing and a reminder of everything that had slipped through his fingers. He pressed his cheek to her soft hair, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Promises of presence, of love, of being the father he never had. And as her small fingers curled around his, something inside him steadied. For a moment, brief, trembling but real, he allowed himself to believe that even beginnings born from fracture could still grow into something whole. That love, if held tightly enough, might yet mend what life had broken. And then came the wound that would reshape him more than any role, any success, or any heartbreak before it. Montana, born into a home already split, carried between two parents doing their best from opposite sides of a fracture, grew up searching for belonging, for identity, for a space that felt entirely her own. Fishburne adored her with a tenderness sharpened by regret. Every school recital he missed because of filming. Every birthday he arrived late to, from a set halfway across the world. Every moment he wished he could give her the stability he never had. He once confided to a close friend, "I wasn't always there when she needed me, but I thought love would still reach her." Yet even with all that love, the gap between them was already taking shape. Small at first, then widening year after year, until nearly a full decade of quiet distance stood between father and daughter, long before the world ever witnessed the storm that was coming. But in 2010, at just 18, after years of quiet drift, she made a decision that struck like a lightning bolt across the country. She stepped into the adult film industry, and overnight, the world turned her name into a headline. Overnight, the name Montana Fishburne became a media firestorm. And Laurence, who had spent decades building a career defined by dignity, discipline, and craft, was swept into a wave of scrutiny he had no power to stop. Hollywood whispered behind closed doors. Commentators dissected his family as if pain were entertainment. Yet none of it compared to the quiet devastation happening in his own chest. Friends remembered him sitting alone in his home office for hours, hands clasped, eyes unfocused, as if trying to trace when the distance had begun. Whether it started with the divorce, or the long workdays, or simply the silent ache of a child growing into a world he could never fully protect her from. He called. She didn't answer. He reached out. She pulled further away. He tried to guide her. She insisted she didn't need saving. And then, in a moment of staggering vulnerability, he told the world what he could not bring himself to tell her face to face. "I love her, but I can't save her." Not anger, not judgment. Just the sound of a father breaking in real time, realizing that for all his strength on screen, he was powerless in the one role that mattered most. This became the deepest wound of his life. Not the marriage he lost, not the childhood he survived, not the opportunities he sacrificed. This, watching his daughter drift so far into a world he feared would hurt her, knowing he could no longer shape her path or shield her from the consequences of her choices. Holidays passed in silence. Birthdays arrived without a call. The distance didn't explode. It spread, slowly, painfully, like a shadow lengthening across years. And for a man who had spent his entire life trying to break the cycle of abandonment, nothing cut deeper than realizing that pain can echo across generations, even when you fight with everything you have to stop it. The heartbreak was not loud. It was lingering. It lived in the spaces between unreturned calls, in the ache that settled each time he looked at old photographs, in the haunting knowledge that love had limits he had never wanted to face. Yet, through all the ache, Laurence Fishburne never allowed bitterness to take root. He blamed no one. He carried no resentment. What lived inside him was longing, pure human longing. Longing for reconciliation, longing for understanding, longing for the little girl who once curled her hand around his thumb and believed he could fix anything. That longing exposed the truest, rawest part of him, a man shaped by loss, strengthened by survival, yet still tender enough to hurt where love is concerned. And time, slow as it was, eventually softened what pain could not erase. By the early 2020s, after more than a decade of distance, father and daughter began finding small, cautious ways back to each other. Not a dramatic reunion, not a sudden erasing of wounds, but a gradual thawing. A few exchanged messages, a quiet meeting arranged through family, a conversation that didn't solve everything, but finally opened a door that had been shut for far too long. Insiders close to the family described their relationship in 2025 as healing, not healed. A bond rebuilt not from perfection, but from patience, humility, and the quiet courage to try again. And in that fragile rebuilding, Fishburne discovered a clarity carved only by pain, the truth that humbles every parent eventually. Love can build a home, but it cannot choose the journey our children take. All a parent can do is leave the light on, hoping one day the path leads back. Sometimes, the fiercest storms come not from the world outside, but from the hearts of the very people we love most. And yet, even those storms can pass when compassion outlasts the thunder. Rewind to the 1990s, those fragile years after his first marriage had fallen apart, when life placed in Laurence Fishburne's path a love so gentle it startled him, a softness he didn't know how to hold. Victoria Dillard entered his world not with fireworks, but with a quiet grace that slipped past his defenses before he realized he had them. She listened in a way that made him feel truly heard, even in the moments he said very little. She noticed the way his shoulders tensed when conversations drifted toward family, the way he hesitated before accepting affection, as if love were a language he feared mispronouncing. And slowly, through late-night talks, the warmth of her hand on his back, the soft laughter they shared in dimly lit rooms, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, the possibility of peace. For a brief, golden stretch of time, he let himself imagine that this, finally, might be the love that didn't leave. But love is often most fragile in the hands of those who grew up without it. As their bond deepened, an old instinct crawled back into his chest, quiet, cold, familiar. A voice that whispered, "Careful, nothing stays." Victoria gave him her openness. He offered pieces of himself wrapped in hesitation. She stepped forward. He stepped sideways. She trusted the future. He braced for loss. She sensed it, the distance he didn't know he was creating. Sometimes, in the middle of a calm evening, she would touch his arm and say, almost pleadingly, "You're here, but some part of you keeps the door cracked to run." He never argued. He couldn't, because he knew, deep down, she wasn't wrong. Years later, he admitted, "I cared for her deeply, but fear can masquerade as caution. I didn't know how to let myself be fully loved." The moment their world broke did not arrive with shouting. It came with unbearable gentleness. One night, after weeks on set, he returned home expecting the warmth of her voice, the smell of her vanilla perfume lingering in the hallway. Instead, the apartment was dim, too quiet. And there, beside the door, stood her suitcase. On the table, a single handwritten note, edges trembling slightly as if she had folded it with shaking hands. Not blame, not anger, just 8 words that sliced straight through him. "I hope one day you trust love again." She had kissed him goodbye while he slept. He woke hours later to a room that felt unfamiliar, colder, as if her absence hollowed the air itself. He sat on the floor for a long time, the note in his lap, realizing with devastating clarity that he had not been left. He had pushed her away without meaning to. Victoria hadn't walked out because she stopped loving him. She walked out because she finally understood he was still fighting ghosts she could not defeat for him. Years later, when someone asked him about her during an interview, something in his expression shifted, softened, dimmed, then warmed with reverence. "She was good to me," he said quietly. "Better than I knew how to receive at the time." There was no bitterness, no regret sharpened into blame, only a profound tenderness for a love he once held carefully and released too soon. Their story became one of those private chapters he rarely spoke of, but one that shaped him in ways success never could. Because in losing Victoria, Laurence learned the most haunting truth of all. Sometimes the love that might have saved us arrives at the exact moment we're still learning how to stop running from it. 5 quiet years had passed since the heartbreak of his previous relationship. 5 years in which Laurence Fishburne rebuilt himself slowly, cautiously, like a man learning to trust the ground again. And it was in that season of rebuilding that life brought him someone extraordinary, Gina Torres. She did not enter his world with dramatic fireworks, but with a gentle calm that felt like balm on old wounds. Elegant, thoughtful, fiercely intelligent, she saw the man behind the legend. She recognized the quiet shadows in him, the carefully guarded corners shaped by a childhood of abandonment and an adulthood of relentless pressure. Their connection grew from a place of maturity rather than urgency. Two adults choosing each other with intention, not desperation. Their 2002 wedding reflected that same quiet grace. No spectacle, no grandiosity, just two souls promising to stand shoulder to shoulder. And in June 2007, when their daughter Delilah was placed in his arms, Laurence felt something he had rarely known, a peace so deep it nearly frightened him. He whispered to the newborn resting against his chest, "You will always know you are loved," a vow shaped by every empty space in his own childhood. For years, their home held a serenity rare in Hollywood. Gina's career soared, his legacy grew, and they navigated the chaos of work and parenthood with a harmony built from respect, humor, and shared values. Their love was steady, unhurried, rituals of morning tea, late-night check-ins, handwritten notes left on kitchen counters. Even when jobs pulled them into different cities, they stitched their days together with calls, texts, and weekend flights. But slowly, so slowly it was almost invisible, the rhythm of their partnership began to shift. Laurence took on more demanding roles that consumed him emotionally and physically, while Gina balanced motherhood with the pressures of an evolving career. They were still united, still affectionate, but small gaps formed, gaps that widened into quiet distances. Then came an irony worthy of cinema. Between 2013 and 2015, they were cast as a married couple on Hannibal. On screen, they played two people fighting to hold their marriage together. Off-screen, they were living a parallel story. During tender scenes, Gina would sometimes hold his gaze a second too long, as if hoping their characters might rediscover something their real selves were slowly losing. And when the director called cut, the unspoken truth lingered between them like a shadow. Their script was no longer aligned. By 2017, the unraveling had already settled in the quiet corners of their home. There was no betrayal, no dramatic collapse, just two people who understood, with painful clarity, that love sometimes reaches a point where it can no longer grow. Gina was the first to speak the truth aloud, announcing publicly that they had been separated for months. When paparazzi captured her sharing a gentle moment with another man, tabloids rushed to manufacture drama. But the reality, known only to those close to them, was far more humane. Their marriage had ended privately, respectfully, long before any photographs surfaced. Laurence did not lash out, did not defend himself, did not invite spectacle. Instead, he protected her dignity with a silence that spoke volumes. Friends said his hurt was quiet but unmistakable, a kind of ache you carry in the chest rather than the voice. For a man who had once lost a family in his youth, then fought desperately to build one as an adult, accepting that this chapter had reached its end was devastating. He later confided in a trusted friend, "Sometimes love changes shape before you realize it's slipping through your hands." Even after the divorce was finalized, what remained between them was not bitterness, but a mature, tender understanding. They continued raising Delilah with unity and grace, ensuring she felt anchored even as her parents' lives moved onto different paths. Laurence carried the loss of this marriage not as a failure, but as a testament to how deeply two people can care for each other, even when their journeys diverge. And through the ache, he gained a truth carved from experience: that connection cannot be forced, that love cannot be willed into permanence, and that letting go with kindness can be its own form of devotion. Some love stories survive every storm. Some end in flames. But theirs, Laurence Fishburne and Gina Torres, became something rarer. A love that ended gently, with dignity and tact, leaving behind not wreckage, but a quiet, enduring respect. A chapter closed, not in anger, but in gratitude for the years they shared, and in acceptance that even the deepest love can transform into something softer. A memory that still warms, even after the home it once lived in has changed forever. Sometimes the universe delivers a loss that does not merely hurt. It cuts straight through the armor a man has spent a lifetime building. Not a wound shaped by blood or childhood ghosts, but the kind born from the sudden disappearance of someone whose quiet presence steadied your world in ways you never understood until it vanished. In 2023, that kind of silence descended on Laurence Fishburne, and it carried the name Lance Reddick. Their bond was never loud or performative. It grew in the dim hours between takes, in shared nods, in the small, almost unnoticed acts of respect that, over time, hardened into brotherhood. Lance, with his unbreakable calm, razor-fixed discipline, and almost monastic professionalism, became a grounding force on the John Wick sets. Keanu Reeves once called him grace in human form, and Laurence felt that truth every time Lance steadied a difficult night with nothing more than a look. He still remembers the way Lance's hand briefly tightened on his shoulder during a brutal shooting week. The quiet murmur, "Brother, breathe. We'll get through this." A sentence so simple, yet it anchored him in a way no applause ever could. What made Lance rare was how naturally he became a refuge in an industry that devours sincerity. He asked questions that mattered. He listened without rushing. He noticed when Lawrence's shoulders sagged from exhaustion, when his silence lingered too long, and he checked in with a gentleness that felt almost out of time. Their conversations were never grand, but they carried weight. Talks about family, pressure, dignity, responsibility. Two men mapping their way through a world that had not always made space for them. Their friendship didn't need messages or ritual. It lived in trust, in quiet admiration, in the unspoken understanding of two survivors who recognized the storms the other had weathered. Every so often, they would slip away from the noise of set life for a moment of quiet, leaning against a wall or sitting in near darkness, letting the silence between them speak the truths they didn't need to say out loud. And then, without warning, Lance was gone, taken at 60 by a heart condition he had carried quietly, waging a private war without letting anyone feel its weight. The news didn't break. It detonated. It tore through the industry, but its sharpest edge found Laurence. When reporters asked for a statement, he could only offer the truth grief carved out of him. "We lost our brother." Brother. One word heavy enough to hold decades of respect, and everything he could not bring himself to say. In the days that followed, he spoke of Lance's discipline, his honesty, his dignity. But beneath every controlled sentence lived the ache of reopened wounds, pulling him back to a memory he rarely names. Lance finding him hunched in a corner of a cold soundstage years earlier, quietly sitting beside him, offering nothing but presence, steadfast, gentle, and healing in a way he didn't fully appreciate until now. Lance's passing etched a brutal truth into Laurence, that the greatest gifts in life are not applause or legacy, but the people whose integrity glows like a lantern in the dark. When they leave, the world dims, quietly but unmistakably. Laurence felt that dimming. He still feels it in moments when a long day stretches too thin, when fatigue creeps in, when he instinctively looks for the steadying presence that once stood a few feet away. Because sometimes the quietest men leave the loudest silences. And Lance Reddick, in his grace, his steadiness, his rare decency, left a silence that will follow Laurence Fishburne for the rest of his days. Not as sorrow, but as gratitude, for the privilege of walking beside a man whose kindness was his most enduring art, and whose absence still feels, at times, like a shadow where light used to be. Now, at 64, Laurence Fishburne stands in a chapter of life shaped not by applause or ambition, but by a quiet steadiness earned through storms most men would never survive. His journey from a childhood scraped together in Brooklyn to one of the most respected careers in American cinema has crystallized into a life marked by dignity, discipline, and purpose. Today, his financial legacy reflects decades of relentless work, with an estimated net worth approaching $30 million. It is the kind of wealth that never arrived overnight. It was built brick by brick, roll by roll, through nights of exhaustion, years of sacrifice, and a devotion to craft that never wavered. His real estate portfolio tells the same story. Measured success built from decades of discipline. His primary home in the Hollywood Hills, shielded by tall hedges and quiet gates, is a warm, wood-toned sanctuary with high ceilings, clean lines, and panoramic glass walls that open toward a sweeping view of Los Angeles. Inside, every detail feels intentional. A sunlit reading room where he prepares for roles, shelves lined with scripts and jazz records, and an outdoor deck where the city glows beneath him like scattered embers at night. It is the kind of home a man earns only after a lifetime of standing back up. His New York residence in Hudson Heights offers a different kind of comfort. A stone-floor apartment with wide river views, minimalist architecture, and the quiet dignity of a space designed for reflection. The Hudson flows beneath his windows like a moving reminder of everything he has passed through. Hardship, reinvention, revelation. The apartment is simple, elegant, built for thinking, not showing. Even his cars say something about him. A classic Cadillac restored with care, a precise and polished Audi, and a futuristic BMW i8. Three vehicles that mirror the chapters of his life. They are not symbols of luxury. They are milestones. Proof that the boy who once counted coins for a subway ride grew into a man who built a life through resilience, not privilege. They whisper success rather than flaunt it, embodying the quiet distance he has traveled between where he began and where he now stands. His life today moves at a calmer rhythm, one protected fiercely and shaped by intention. He divides his time between Los Angeles and New York, choosing privacy over spectacle, depth over noise. Most days, he lives alone, a choice made not from loneliness, but from a desire for peace after decades lived under bright lights and heavy expectations. His youngest daughter, Delilah, visits often, filling the quiet rooms of his home with the kind of warmth only a child can bring. Close friends stop by from time to time, sharing meals, conversations, and the ease that comes from trust. But no one shares his roof permanently. He has companionship in his life, a gentle presence he protects from the public eye, yet he remains the anchor of his own household, comfortable in the solitude he once feared. He continues to work, not because he must, but because storytelling remains the language of his spirit. He appears in new films, lends his resonant voice to documentaries, cultivates young talent, and produces through Cinema Gypsy Productions, shaping stories he believes the world should hear. His days begin quietly, often with reading in the early light, followed by long walks that help him anchor his thoughts. Evenings are softened by jazz, Miles Davis, Coltrane, the music that once comforted him during lonely years, now warming the peaceful home he built for himself. He keeps his circle small, choosing sincerity over quantity, and though life has weathered him, there is a gentleness in him that comes only from having survived hurt without letting it turn him hard. His relationship with his children remains one of the deepest threads of his present life. Langston, steady and thoughtful, is forging his own creative path in writing and producing, and Laurence speaks of him with quiet pride. Montana, a chapter marked by pain, distance, misunderstanding, and the difficult weight of public scrutiny, has slowly found her way back into his life through time, humility, and the fragile courage it takes to rebuild something once broken. Their relationship is not perfect, but it breathes again, and that alone is a quiet miracle he guards carefully. And Delilah, the youngest, remains his softest place, a reminder that love can grow even after heartbreak. She visits often, bringing laughter to the still rooms of his home, grounding him with the uncomplicated affection only a child can offer. As for romance, he lives privately. There is companionship, warmth, and connection in his life, but he guards it from the world. He has learned, through 2 marriages and the long, slow ache of rebuilding himself, that love, to survive, must be sheltered. His relationship with his mother, Hattie Bell, remains a delicate thread of memory and reverence. Their bond carried strains and unspoken shadows, the kind that grow not from anger, but from years of 2 people trying to survive more than they could ever explain to each other. There were seasons in his youth when silence lingered between them longer than words, moments when hardship made them stand on opposite sides of the same pain, each carrying burdens the other could not fully understand. But time, as it often does, softened the distance. With age, Laurence began to see her not only as the woman who held their fragile world together, but as a human being who had once stood trembling beneath responsibilities far greater than any one person should bear. Now, when he thinks of her, it is with gratitude for the sacrifices that shaped him. The late nights she graded papers, the quiet strength she carried, the safety she built from almost nothing. He sometimes wishes he had told her more while she was still close enough to hear it. More gratitude, more understanding, more of the love he carried but struggled to express. Yet even in that regret, her influence remains a compass in his private life, guiding him still. His philanthropic work has expanded with the quiet urgency of someone who remembers what it means to grow up without safety nets. Over the years, he has donated to arts programs for underprivileged youth, theater foundations, literacy initiatives, and organizations offering housing stability and education for Black students pursuing storytelling. Some years, his contributions reach 6 or 7 figures, though he never seeks credit. His giving is not performance, but repayment. Gratitude for the opportunities he fought so hard to earn. His legacy is not just what appears on screen, it is what he plants in others. When people speak of Laurence Fishburne now, they speak not only of the legend who became Morpheus or the powerhouse performances that shaped modern cinema. They speak of his steadiness, his gravity, and the dignity that follows him into every room. His life has been carved by abandonment, heartbreak, fractured family, loss, revelation, and the silent wounds that shaped him long before fame ever found him. Yet no wound hardened him. Every fracture widened his empathy. His story stands as proof that greatness is not born from ease, but from endurance. Not from perfection, but from rising again and again when life tries to break you. And so, at this stage of his life, Laurence Fishburne stands as living testimony that a man can begin with nothing and still build a life illuminated by integrity, generosity, and quiet strength. His journey invites us to look inward, to cherish the people who stand with us, to heal what can be healed, to forgive what still hurts, and to build families, homes, and futures that honor the love we give and the love we wish we had received. If his life has ever touched yours, through his films, his resilience, or his extraordinary humanity, leave a tribute below to honor the path he walked and the light he continues to carry. And before you go, we at Golden American Stars wish you and your family a life of peace, health, harmony, happiness, and abundance. A life warm with love and steady with hope.